are the most likely ways a fire could start in the Salvation Army?
Well, currently the most likely way is through arson and its deliberate fire setting. That is extremely likely, especially when you're dealing with sort of vulnerable and deprived areas. One of the biggest issues around arson is making sure that there are no pieces of flammable equipment pushed up against building, bins, that kind of thing. They're all stored securely. They're all made sure that they're locked away and that they can't be accessed.
So if a manager or a corps officer has a limited amount of time to spend on fire safety issues, what should they do first? What would make the biggest impact?
Without doubt, the most important part of fire safety are the means of escape. It's how people would exit the fire or exit from the building in case of a fire. So that's the most important side of it. Then it's really to concentrate on the staff so that they know what to do and how to deal with it. Most of the fire precautions in a modern building have already been dealt with and are already in situ. So it's really making sure that your staff are aware of the requirements and how to escape from the building.
What would a fire enforcement officer expect to find as a typical Salvation Army programme when they visit?
The first and foremost thing that we would expect to find is a risk assessment. Without the risk assessment, it's very difficult for us to understand how the safety of the premise has been judged and how to take things forward. It is almost a non-starter for us if the risk assessment is not there. Following on from that, there are lots of other pieces of record that we would need to see, and these would include the training regime, the testing regime for the fire alarms, the emergency lighting, any cookers, any electrical testing, any sort of like emergency lighting or fire extinguishing testing, and particularly the training records. If a premises has those when we come and see them, then we understand that they understand fire safety. If the manager doesn't know where to find them, doesn't understand them, then the alarm bells start to ring in our heads and we start to look a bit more deeply into the systems and processes and practices.
What would you recommend in terms of our training regime, training staff and volunteers?
Well, the law says that really you should be training on induction, and you should be training every 6 months or looking at those training, and that you should be training whenever the need arises. And I think the third one is the most important. It's when the need arises, when there have been any changes in particular, but also if you feel that there is a need or someone's not too sure of how the fire safety systems operate. It's really, really important that everybody knows as soon as they come into a building how to escape from it, and that they maintain that knowledge.
What's your view on how we should best train people how to use fire extinguishers, or where, perhaps first part A of that question, where should fire extinguishers, how should they be used?
Fire extinguishers are used to enable people to make an escape from the building. They are particularly, that's the legislation that they're particularly used in. There is a secondary side of it where extinguishers could be used for property protection, and the two things often become quite confused. It's quite acceptable for fire extinguisher training to be that no specific training takes place except that you understand what the fire extinguishers are and what they do. You don't actually have to have any practical fire extinguisher training. If you want to go further and protect the building and the property, then it's advisable to have an understanding of how to use the extinguishers in a more diverse situation. So practical training is then recommended for property protection.
Who should be trained to use fire extinguishers?
The person trained to be used or to use fire extinguishers can be a variety of different people. It really depends on how the organisation views the loss of the building or the facility. The recommendation is in some areas that you wouldn't need to train anybody in the practical use of the fire extinguishers, and that they would just need to understand how to use a fire in emergency to make their way through a building. If you wanted someone to re-enter into the building, it is a whole different ballgame, and they would need some significant training, significant practical training on the uses of extinguishers, what the extinguishers would do. Those people should be obviously volunteers and people prepared to undertake those tasks, and preferably the fire wardens and fire marshals and people who understand and know the building, and also, more importantly, know when to leave the building when the fire gets too much or should the fire become out of control.
Is there any official definition of what a fire marshal or fire warden is?
There are official definitions, and a fire warden is someone who has an understanding of the building and who has an understanding of basic fire safety and fire practices, and is often there for extended periods of time, so they're not someone that's going to be remote from a building. They are someone that knows who's generally in and out and knows the nooks and crannies of the building, so their brief is to be able to clear the building of people should the alarm go off, and understand when it becomes unsafe for them to remain as well.
How often should fire wardens be trained?
Generally, I would expect a fire warden to have the initial training and then a regular update of at least once a year. It doesn't need to be the whole course, but it certainly needs to be a good update and a good clear instruction. If there are any significant changes to the building or to the family or to the processes and practices within the organisation, then I would expect further training to occur.
What's the best way of testing your fire evacuation plan?
There are several methods of testing a fire evacuation plan. Sometimes the best way is to physically do it. Other times is to sit down with a floor plan and sit there and do a floor plan exercise. Always the best way is going to be an evacuation plan. However, that's not always convenient, and it's not always a good thing to do, putting other people at risk. And it's a balance and a trade-off to the risks of the people using the premises. Sometimes you can't practice a full evacuation because half of the occupants are elderly and frail, and you wouldn't want to put those people at risk by putting them outside. Other times it might be that you have a big concert hall and you wouldn't want to evacuate a complete audience, but what you would want to do is make sure that all of the staff are very, very clear about what their responsibilities and procedures are when dealing with a large audience, especially members of the public, and how to assist and guide them from the building in a safe and practical manner.
You've done this before. Has it been on the course?
I don't know how I'm going to follow this. This is going to, it's sort of setting up.
When do you two stop it, or else I'm out there?